I guess with that, we'll move straight on to our next section, which is just having a conversation with our guest speaker, which is today, it's Om Dai. Om Dhungel, I call him Dai. Dai means just for some of you who doesn't know, Dai means brother, elder brother in Nepalese language. So it just comes out as Dai. Yeah, so, okay. So like I said, today's conversation is all about leading with strengths, seeing possibility rather than problems. So I'm very much delighted to be joined by Om Thingel, who is an author, speaker, and founder of the Strengths-Based Leadership Community Group. So a little bit about Om's journey from Bhutan to Blacktown is one of resilience, transformation, and service. He's been a very strong advocate for community empowerment and leadership that starts from within. So, Omdai, thank you very much for joining the conversation today.
Thank
So,
you.
so if I can begin by asking you a question. I know that you very much passionately talk about the strengths-based approach, and which is the reason why you've started this community group, right? So can you tell us where it all started for you and what it really means in practice?
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everyone, for joining this Strength-Based Leadership Community Group session. This is more of a movement. And I believe this is a movement, we will be, working towards, driving change that will change the way we live our lives in the future. We have a very, strong or, powerful vision with this community group. So I really invite you all to be very actively involved in this, in part of this movement. So thank you all for, making the time to join us today. Now, where it all began, Sarah, I can say that, it didn't really begin in any training room for sure. I think it all began in refugee camps in Nepal. Now, there's nothing to celebrate about being a refugee, but what I've learned is, there's so much to celebrate about the learnings from it. So, this is where, my sort of journey has begun. When when I, along with over 100,000 Bhutanese, fled our country, Bhutan, and became refugees in Nepal, we lost everything. That's what we thought. But something remarkable happened in those refugee camps. Very soon, we realized that we hadn't lost the capacity to love and care for each other. Doctors and nurses who had fled the country, they started taking care of the elderly, the sick, and the children. Teachers started tree schools, and people often ask me, what's tree schools? They were simply classes run under trees because we didn't have any classrooms. Carpenters and masons, they started helping people to build their huts. And everybody pitched in every way they could. Now,
Mm.
we couldn't really apply for funding as we do here in Australia. Rather, we had to look for, who knows what, who can do what skills do we have in the community, help mobilize that, and look after each other. Now, I share this story because that's when I realized there's strength everywhere, even in a crisis. We just have to nurture it. So for me, strength-based leadership simply means shifting from asking what's wrong to what's strong. Shifting from asking what are the problems to looking at what's working well here. Help people to do more of it and build from there. We still address needs, but by focusing on strengths. So I might leave it there for now.
Thank you. That's very, very inspiring. I really love, I was just writing it down. I'm just capturing, a few things that you said there, shifting from what's wrong to what's strong. So that's very, very powerful, that sentence, what's wrong to what's wrong, right? What's wrong to what's wrong. So uh, I really love that. And that
And
really,
we all
it's
have
very
something
catchy.
strong, Sarah.
We
Sorry.
do.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we do have, every one of us, we see that we have something strong. We have some strengths, whatever the situation may be. So
Yeah,
we just
yeah,
focus on that
absolutely.
shit.
Yeah,
Shit.
oh, just focusing on that. I know I mean, we're human being and I think we all have problems, right? I mean, that's part of life.
Yeah.
And if we always get stuck about just, just feeling sad about our problems and
Mm,
just not doing anything about it, and I think life is just not going to move forward, right?
yeah.
So it's about just focusing on looking at, yeah, that's, the strengths. So, and I really love how you said about everybody has strength and we just have to nurture it, right? So that's very powerful. So thanks for sharing that. But I just want to also ask, I mean, I know perhaps it sounds like it's a cliche, but how did you actually apply it I mean, in your life? I mean, is there a moment where it just, clicked, all right, okay, I mean, we know this.
Mhm.
There's one thing about knowing, and there's other about actually applying it, right? And applying it actually consistently. So is there a
I
moment
guess,
that you could
yeah.
share where you perhaps have applied it in your life?
Yeah, I think it wasn't really a choice, I guess. Like when you become refugee,
Yeah,
you've lost everything. Start looking at,
sure.
we had two choices. One was to sort of say, hey, we've lost everything and blame
Mm,
whoever had wronged us, like blame the king or the government and, keep talking about it. And we realized that, we were going downhill every single day. And the other way to look at was, we had to normalize life.
mm,
And I think COVID taught us that as well.
yeah.
So for us,
Hmm.
dealing with COVID was a lot more easier, I guess, because, we had gone through this a few times in the past. So when we lost everything, we must survive in a survival mode.
Hmm.
We knew what to look for. So there wasn't so much a panic. So when we became refugees, we started sort of, if this happened, like, we are able to do that. Then we said, okay, let's explore further.
Yeah.
So when we have this young people, we ask them, like, what did you do back home? And somebody would say, I studied up to year eight, and here I am now. Or I finished year 10, and I can't study anymore. So that was the first thing. Like we wanted to get the young people back to school. So building on what they aspire to do, what they love to do, we started going out and looking for help. One was, of course, the teachers didn't want to leave them by themselves, so they started. Like we were talking about, how do we
Mm,
start schools, and we didn't have a classroom. So some of the teachers said, "Hey, I'll start my class under that tree because we needed a shade. Like it is very hot there. At least we need some shade." So one said, like, I'll run my class 7 there under that tree. Somebody else said, I'll run under that tree. So that's how that tree school started. And
yeah.
similarly, other things started happening. It was built on, like, say, for example, myself, I'm a telecom engineer. I was, like a fresh young telecom engineer, become a refugee. My skills were totally you know, uh, not required. We didn't have
Mm.
mobile phones there, no phones in a refugee camp. So I was totally unemployable. But
Yeah.
somebody picked up on me and said, hey, Om, you can talk. Maybe you should base yourself in Kathmandu, start lobbying with different governments. And that's what I did. Like I could speak in English and, lobby with different governments together with other colleagues. We stationed
Yeah.
ourselves and lobbied. So based on our own strengths and skills that we had, we started
Mm,
applying those. So
mm,
whoever could manage the camps, they stayed in the camps, and we had an administrative structure, camps, sectors, and subsectors, and so we had built an administrative structure to run the camps.
yeah.
And later on, even like UNHCR had a number of visits because they were considered as one of the best run camps in the world. So we built on everybody's strength and focused on whatever strength we had in areas that we were strong at. And as a result of that, yes, we couldn't go back to Bhutan. We were hoping to go back to Bhutan, but we moved from when we were doing advocacy, we were also doing adversarial advocacy. We were complaining about what was wrong, what the government is doing, and that
Right.
wasn't working. So what we did was we flipped that to diplomatic advocacy. We started focusing on what would be common between Australia government and Bhutan government. And we compliment the Australian government for doing something good in Bhutan. And then
Mm-hmm.
we approach them and we also ask them to, hey, can you fund us to run our schools? And they were one of the first ones to do that. So similarly, we
Wow.
applied that, diplomatic advocacy and lobbied with different governments. And as a result of that, plus, a lot of efforts from UNHCR and different countries, over 100,000 Bhutanese refugees have been resettled in 8 different countries in the world now. So that's a big sort
Right.
of achievement, I guess.
Oh, that's awesome. So, I mean, I love diplomatic applying that theory, diplomatic advocacy, right?
Yeah,
It
moving
works,
from
I guess,
adversarial advocacy to diplomatic.
to diplomatic
Yeah.
advocacy, and
Mm.
you're to talking them, telling them, okay, what they're doing good for
Yeah.
us and for the community, and then
Yeah.
you get that
Engage
from
them.
them. Yeah,
Yeah.
engage, you get more engagement from them. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. I guess you did touch a little bit about why it's important, right?
Yeah.
To what why it is important or even necessary to take
Mm.
I mean why I think we touched a little bit
Mm.
about why its importance, but I
Yeah.
guess can you tell us a little bit like a bit a bit
Mm.
more,
Yeah.
expand on its
Yeah.
importance,
Yeah.
especially in a community development and the leadership,
Yeah.
applying the
Okay.
strength-based approach.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I think I could do that from two perspectives. One, let's look
Mhm.
at the government side. Like, a few years ago, I was looking at my tax return statement. And as a typical analyst, I am like, I like to dig numbers and, find a story behind the numbers. And what I found was the government, currently spends about one third of its revenue on welfare. So the
Mm,
government has a huge commitment to, uplift people and help people, live a good life. But then I also found that during crisis, during, situation like COVID, the spending goes up. And that's the least time we can least afford because that's the time we don't have any revenue,
mm,
or revenue goes down because of the crisis. Yet the requirement goes up. And given
right.
we adopt a need-based approach at the moment, like it's a top-down need-based approach, we look at what are the needs in the community and trying to meet those needs. And through that approach, as I said, government currently spends one third of its revenue on welfare, and it's growing at about 2.6%, almost 3% every year. So that's clearly not sustainable. So, firstly, we need to look at ways to do things differently. And perhaps we need to move from that top down, need based approach to a bottom up, strength based approach. And we have applied that in different situations, and it works really well. So, that's the first thing. From a community or from a personal or a community level, if you focus on a need based approach, there's a sort of unintended consequences of creating dependency.
Mm,
You start meeting needs, you give more and there's need for more to be given. So to avoid that situation, if you flip that approach, if you start focusing on people's strengths and assets, so you empower them and then they are part of building that community. So we wanted to experiment this within the Bhutanese community. When the Bhutanese refugee settlement started in 2008, we thought, okay, let's experiment this and see if we can apply a different approach to this. So when people started arriving, we would go and receive them at the airport, but immediately we want them to be engaged, in helping others. So firstly, people had to get employment, people had to, learn language skills, etc., etc. But at the same time, active involvement of the community was very important. So as an example, like we brought people together and, had a conversation and started focusing and asking them, hey, what do you love doing? What did you do back in the camp? So we started focusing on what people did back in the
mm,
camp or what their passion was. Say, for example, we were, having conversations with the young people. and said, what do you like doing? And there were a lot of overwhelming, a lot of people, young people who love artwork. So we sort of got them together. And then they were, we also found out there were one or two who were really good artists. Someone had received, number of awards in the camps, and there was somebody else who had received different awards in the camp. So they were also
Mm.
keen to teach others. So we connected these people, 16 or so, 15 or 16 kids who wanted to learn art with those two others who were keen to teach. So we made that connection, and off they go. We didn't have to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, because they were passionate about teaching, these two would get up at night or whatever, and they wanted to organize things and you know take that initiative. On the other hand, these others were so passionate about learning, and they were quite well recognized artists. They were quite inspirational people as well, so they were very keen to do that. So we didn't really have to push them to go and attend the classes, etc. So we had classes going on almost on their own because they were passionate about doing things.
Yeah.
Similarly, we had, people who were teaching back in the camp. They couldn't be teachers here. But then we started spoken English classes. We started
Mm.
running a spoken English school. And those teachers really wanted to teach. And they volunteered and started teaching people who didn't have the language ability. So we
Yeah.
adopted this approach. It's a long story short. We were able to get almost,
Mm-hmm.
what is that? I think within 7 or 8 years, we had 60% house ownership. So meaning, people who are able to find work, find employment, develop that borrowing capacity, and then buy a house. And now, I think after 15 years, house ownership within the Bhutanese refugee settlement in Sydney is
Mm.
over 90%, as against
Oh, wow.
70% at the national average. So I think by adopting that strength-based approach, we have been able to achieve some significant results.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. Thanks,
Thank
Omdai.
you.
So I guess I'm just going to move on to my next question. I know that you often talk about, that leadership actually starts from within, and it's an
Mm,
inside out approach that you always talk about, right?
mm,
So how does self-awareness and inner strength connect to leading and empowering others?
mm. I think for me, it's not so much by choice, but through
It's
what I had to go through. I think
yeah.
that was very, very necessary. Like being self-aware of what you can and cannot do, and
Mm.
that level of mindfulness that I had to bring into deal with life. I think was learned as I went along with a lot of challenges. And I think one of I could perhaps share one story where
Mhm.
when I was living in as a refugee in Nepal, I was a little crazy and wanted to do an MBA. That my wife and I sold everything we had, including her jewelry, and had enough money to pay for my, one semester tuition fees, and then managed to come here to Australia. I thought that was great. But then once I landed here, to pay tuition fees as an international student and other struggles was hard enough. And then my properties back home was all confiscated at the government, so I couldn't get anything here. And secondly, to be living away from my loved ones, my wife, my little daughter, she was just 8 years old then, my elderly parents, who were living in the refugee camps. Life wasn't really easy. And at one point in time, it got so bad, I couldn't sleep 5 nights at a stretch. And the next morning, I had to go to work. So first I went to UTS. I had to do some assignment because I couldn't afford a laptop then. I had to go to the library, computer lab and do my assignment there. I went in the morning for a group assignment. After that, I walked to the Coles Express at 400 George Street. When I was crossing George Street and Liverpool Street, because I hadn't slept for 5 nights, my vision started to blur.
Mm.
And in that crowd moment, I realized that I had fallen down. And somebody dragged me on the side, and this person could have, saved my life. But, if it wasn't, then, that person certainly, changed my life forever. Now, when that happened, like from that time onwards, I started thinking, what if I was killed that day? What would my daughter say? Would she be proud of a father who had collapsed because he couldn't, you know, manage himself, or my parents, who had high expectations about me? So from that day onwards, I started realizing, no, this is not right. I need to focus on what things that I can control. I
Mm.
was then, thinking of the all the problems in the world, and like that was overwhelming, and I went through anxiety, and like it was so difficult. I just can't explain how I was going through. And then after that event, I realized, it's not the way to live. Let me try something different. So I started focusing on myself, and I
Mm.
had a lot of help from the university, and I reached out to people, and I started getting that spiritual help as well. So I started doing yoga and meditation, and started being much more calmer. And I just focus on things that I could control, take control of. I could focus on
Yeah.
doing a few more extra hours when I was on holiday, on leave, so I could earn some extra dollars, and perhaps I could make a phone call to my daughter, or I could, uh, eat better, or I could sleep better and do my exams better and get better results. So I
Yeah.
started now really focusing on things that I could take control of, and you know didn't really drift away to areas that I couldn't
Mm.
really do anything about. So
Yeah.
that really helped me, and that wasn't easy, but I really had to make that choice. And I think thanks to a lot of people who helped me during that period, it was very hard, but I became much more calmer, and the way I have approached life is totally different
Is
since then.
different.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's very, very inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I actually must say, I'm particularly, I mean, I did ask that question earlier, right? The prompt about, what you're grateful about. And I must say, I'm very much grateful for you sharing that story because I myself needed that at this very moment because even as a life coach, right? And again, like you said, we think that the world's problem is our problem
Mm,
and
yeah.
all that, right? And I mean, yeah, I mean, you all go through, you have moments in life, and I've had that, and recently I was feeling a bit low about life and all that. Anyway, that's it happens, right?
Yeah.
And actually that really shifted me actually. So thank you so much,
Yeah.
So
And I think we need to learn
yeah,
to respond rather than react, because a lot of
yes,
times, if you have
yeah,
don't have that stability with
mm,
ourselves,
yeah,
leading that inside out approach means if you are
yeah,
not stable yourself, then we
yeah,
tend to react. And
mm,
then once you are more stable, then you're able
yeah,
to react,
correct.
respond more,
More
appropriately.
respond. Yeah, and
Mm,
absolutely. And perhaps I was again, reacting, to a few things, perhaps,
mm,
so that. And it's about it comes with the practice. You just got to
yes.
keep doing
Yeah.
it. And it becomes, and as a human being, and sometimes, and again, like you said, self-awareness, just being
Mm,
aware about that
yeah.
and doing something about it, right? I think the first and
Mm,
foremost is just being aware.
all right.
So thank you so much. And look at you now where you are, right? So
Without the
if you
hair.
perhaps if it wasn't for that moment, I guess who knows, you probably wouldn't be where you are now, right? So I think
Yeah.
every experience in life,
Mm,
there's a reason behind it, right? So we really need to appreciate that
yeah.
it's not just the good times, the bad moments as well, right? It's a
Yeah.
learning. We go through that and it only makes you stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might just add that, one of my biggest realization has been, like, it's not anger, hatred, or a sense
Mm.
of revenge. Uh, Rather, like service to humanity in the face of adversity, and love, care, and compassion that can transform your life for the better.
Hmm.
And it's not easy, but the choice is obvious.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not
Yeah.
easy. Yeah, correct. It's easier said than done, but yeah, but it's a choice.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So thanks for that.
Thank
So
you.
with that, and I'm just being mindful of the time, I'm just gonna leave you with one last question. I guess we have or to, for all our listeners today, um, you know, who actually would want to, who is perhaps seeking to lead or serve differently, right? What's
mm,
one simple shift they can make today
mm.
to start leading from their strengths right now?
Mm, I think we know a lot of things, but sometimes we don't put into practice. So nothing new, but here are some simple things that we all can do, to take, adopt a strength-based approach. Firstly is, whether it's with yourself, with your community, or, like working at work, start by noticing what's already working. We tend to see things, what's broken or what's not working, what's the problem. Let's start noticing what's already working. Instead of asking what's wrong, what's broken, try asking, what's already good here and how can we build on it? That's the first thing. Secondly, appreciate a strength in someone around you. Just say, like, Sara, you are such a good host. You run this so well. Now, I'm saying, not saying this for the sake of saying, but it's a fact. So, and just do that, like if
Hmm.
there's somebody next to you doing something good, or if you see something good in that person, just say that.
Yeah.
Keeping it to yourself doesn't make that person any better, any worse. But if you can share that,
Yeah.
if you just like something, you like
You
somebody's hair,
just, yeah,
like
correct.
me, I like your bald head. Somebody said that, and I thought, wow, that is fantastic. I was a little worried, and my wife says, why don't you put on a hat? But if somebody said, "Oh, you look really good in bald head," I thought that was fantastic. So I ran, and told my wife that I don't need a hat anymore. So just share that. Tell
Yeah.
somebody. If they have done something good. Like we tend to pick up
Yeah.
things that are
Even
gone, but we
correct.
don't tend to do that a lot. Because when we focus on what's strong, we go stronger together.
Mm.
So that's the thing. And then finally, self care. And I think I know so many of you, and I don't think you do that very well. You take care of others. I know many of you are in the service of somebody else, and you're taking care of everybody else, but not yourself.
Mm.
And sometimes that's really important because especially people who work in the community sector, we don't take care of ourselves. And I've realized that, having a very deep conversation with my mentor time and again, you would always ask, oh, what's your time with your family, with your wife and your daughter? I said, oh, I really normally take them, when I volunteer there and here. I said, no, 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 that's not your time with your daughter, your
Yeah.
time with your wife.
Yeah.
So I just realized I had less than one person at one point in time. So I had to
Hmm.
really revisit my life and, create that space. So I think it's really important for us to, take care of ourselves. Are we kind to ourselves? Are we too hard on ourselves? Because when something goes wrong, we tend to blame ourselves a lot. You know, if it's a friend, we'll say, "Hey, don't worry, things will be fine." But we don't do that to ourselves. So I want you all to be kind to yourself, and I'll leave
Thank
it.
you. That's very,
Thank
very
you.
powerful. So, thanks for that. And thank you, Omdai, for sharing such an inspiring insights and stories. So, thank you.